Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be designing some military uniforms for my fantasy dystopia world. I'm going to be using some of my in real life experience. No, I'm not in the military, but I have some experience with NJROTC, which is a school group association thingy, and it functions based off of the real military. So I don't know why it's glitching like that, but basically I'm going to start out by drawing some different body shapes from for like a fashion perspective, so that we have a base for what we need. Because the first thing you really want to consider is what kind of fantasy people are going to be wearing these, because let's face it, that's kind of the hardest thing. You could just use real life military uniforms, but as you can see with my third figure, it's going to have digigrid legs, which means that they're more like animal legs and not human legs, and therefore we can't really put them in the same uniform as we would with a, humanoid person. Now, there's a lot of issues I see a lot of the time with fantasy uniforms, and it's kind of just a pet peeve of mine since I've been in my NJROTC program for so long. But I see a lot of people just kind of make uniforms look not necessarily bad, but inaccurate, like it would never pass. It's unrealistic. So what I'm starting off with doing now is I'm going to draw the actual military uniform that I'm going to be basing these off of, which is known as a service dress blue, or an SDB for short. These are typically worn for formal gatherings by officers and sometimes chief petty officers. So this is what you would see on higher ranking military people, and that's what I'm planning to use it for in my campaign, because you don't want to use like a fancy formal wear uniform for, say, being a mechanic on the board, on board like a ship, because you have to think about what your military job is. The first portion of a military's job is to get their job done. So these people are going to be the higher ranking officials on my ship, or sky ship or whatever, because it's a steampunk world. We'll just call it that for short. But these people are going to be completing missions and stuff and overseeing other people. They're going to be the ones in charge, and therefore I have to make them dress as if they are in charge. So what I'm basing them off of right now, there's a little bit of a gap, but I'm looking at some reference pictures for real SDB uniforms, and I'm just gonna be drawing that really fast. And it's just valuable to creators to look at real life things that they can base their fantasy stuff off of. And there's just so many inaccuracies I'll see a lot of the time in fantasy worlds, or even in sci-fi worlds, or even just, fake militaries in our world now. I believe the anime I was watching was Tokyo Ghoul. No, not Tokyo Ghoul, my bad. Dead Man Wonderland. I'm sorry, it takes place in Tokyo also, and it's dark and disturbing, so. Oh my goodness. That uniform actually made me stop watching the show, because when I saw it at first, it just made me so angry that I couldn't even focus on the rest of the show. It was kind of a bland basic one, but everything was lopsided. The lady was supposed to be a high-ranking official, but she had bright red lipstick, huge hoop earrings, a super lopsided haircut which covered one of her eyes. She was chewing bubblegum, wearing uniform heels which were just unfunctional. And you can have heels in the uniform, because sometimes that does happen, but they'd have to be much lower heels. You can't wear stilettos with a uniform, because remember, your job in the military is to get stuff done. You can't be in super unfit clothing to do anything if you can't do anything in them. And like, obviously she's not going to be the one in charge of, changing the oil on a ship, or like, clearing the runway for an airplane takeoff on an aircraft carrier. But she's not even going to be able to walk all day around to supervise if she's wearing heels that are that high. Her hair is lopsided. Her makeup makes her stand out too much. Again, uniforms they come from the word uni and forma, which means people are supposed to look the same approximately. Another thing is, a lot of the time in fantasy settings, they lean too far into the one form and they don't differentiate their people at all. You're gonna have officers and chiefs and such, which are higher ranking people. They're gonna look different in their uniforms because of, and they're probably gonna have, medals, ribbons, aiguillettes. For my non-ROTC people, an aiguillette is basically a rope that is pinned over one of the shoulders. I'll be drawing them in these designs later, but they're gonna have something that differentiates them. Sometimes they're gonna be really subtle for non-military people, like insignias, which is basically what determines how high ranked up this person is. You're gonna want people on your staff, you're gonna want people who are higher ranking, you're gonna want them to be differentiated from your lower ranking people, because you don't want them to get confused. You want to be able to tell who your higher ranking people are. Sometimes you can even give them whole different uniforms, because there are different uniforms. There are for different purposes. You're going to have your mechanics wear something else. Some shows do a really good job at this by color coding things. Something that we do in my own unit is that we have aiguillettes to differentiate who's on staff, and we have SDB uniforms, while most of the class wears NSUs. What you can see I'm doing here is I'm listing out the problems that I have with the feline body type, and why I can't just use the normal Army Navy uniform for this. So the legs are the main problem, so I found a workaround. I found some inspiration. No, I'm not directly copying it, but there is these little foot sleeves. I forget what they're called, but they're for color guards. So they are worn for ceremonies and such in the real military, but for this purpose, I'm giving them to people with feline type feet, just so that they can wear the uniform and it looks nice and clean. Because a lot of the time what I do for characters is for feline characters, I'll give them bandages around their feet because they just have different shaped legs. And you can do this a lot of the time with a ton of different things. Some characters are going to have tails, some characters are going to have wings, some characters are going to have paws, and you want to find workarounds so that they still look neat and professional. And you're going to sometimes even just want to, make it almost hard to see those things in uniform, because you want a lot of the time you just want your characters to blend in. You can have them be wildly different outside of the uniform, and they can have their own personalities, interests, everything, but sometimes that's not going to show in uniform. You're not going to see while I'm in uniform that I do cosplays. That's just something that you don't do really, and you just want everything to look neat, professional, uniform, and you're gonna want to make everything look almost symmetrical. And if it's asymmetrical, it needs to be tastefully asymmetrical and not sloppy asymmetrical. You can have other problems, like this character that I'm planning for specifically is they have robot arms, and so you got to think about how you want to do that. Another thing that you can see me drawing right now is what's called a gig line. I'm doing it completely wrong, and I'm going to go fix that later. But a gig line basically marks where the jacket closes, and it lines up with the belt. So this is a big thing I see when our own cadets are wearing their uniforms. They can mess up a lot. Usually the women do not have gig lines whatsoever, but when it's askew, it's very obvious. So you want to make sure that the seam of the pants, the dress shirt, and the belt all line up so that it's one neat line. Here I'm drawing some more aiguillettes to go back onto my point on the mechanical arms, right? I'm using the aiguillettes to divide, not only to make it look nicer for the character, but also to differentiate. So in my military world, I'm trying to decide what are aiguillettes for. So I'm going to give this one character one aiguillette, which will be a specific color unique to them to differentiate what their job is. I'm going to make this character a sniper, right? And then they're obviously not going to be sniping in this uniform. This is their nice fancy party uniform or ceremony uniform, or even just working like on the bridge or something uniform. It's not going to be their active combat uniform. They're going to have something different for that. I'm also giving them what's called a combination cover because I just think they look cool. For my non-ROTC people, again, a more common way to say it would just be a captain's hat. So I'm designing right now the arms so that they look different. Not super important, but your main goal with the uniform is to make things look nice, and that's all you gotta do. You gotta make it look nice, you gotta make it look neat, and you gotta make it look uniform. Working around things is something that we have to do. Sometimes kids won't be allowed to cut their hair. Sometimes kids will have piercings, and you just have to find a way to work around it. Usually those things aren't allowed, but some kids will wear a bandage over their piercing, or sometimes for hair, they just have to find a way to braid it back, which I'm going to focus on a lot now. Hair is like my favorite thing to talk about when talking about uniforms, and it's for the simple reason that it's kind of like really easy to remember for me. So what do you do with hair in uniforms? In the real Navy, it used to be for men 2 inches of bulk, which means how fluffy it's allowed to be or how far out it's allowed to go from the head. It had to be combed back. What's it called? Sideburns. Yes, sideburns have to be only to the middle of the ear, and hair cannot touch the collar. It has to be neat now. Like literally, the regulations for it now is neat and professional, which is like, I'm so sorry. I have so much respect for people in the military and whatever. Not my place to judge, but that's so vague. That's just like how are people like me supposed to design fantasy uniforms if that's what vagueness we get for our thing? That's silly. But basically, what that means is you basically have to find a way to work around hair. For what I'm doing for this world, because most of my people are going to be elves in the military, I know that they have to have longer hair. I can't just say you have to cut it, buzz cut immediately for all of them. No, because as much as that is what the real military does, sometimes you don't want to do what the real military does. And so what I would be doing is I would be making more gender neutral hair standards, which means that we'd be following similar but not exactly the same as the real military's hair standards for women, which is again 2 inches bulk, but bangs may not exceed the eyebrows. The sideburns may not extend past the middle of the ear, and hair must either be short enough to not touch the collar, or it has to be in a bun, which may not exceed 2 inches bulk and cannot interfere with the cover. Now, what I'm going to be changing is I don't want my characters to wear buns, just because I think that would look tacky, especially for the male characters. I think in the real world, I would actually prefer to see a more gender neutral standard come out, because right now I feel it would just look nicer to have everyone follow the same standards. Or what we could do is in this fantasy world, I'm going to make it so that the ponytails may exceed about 4 inches, which is similar again to what we have in the real military. And if not in a ponytail, then it must be in a braid. And it can be as long as they want in the braid. And I think that works because A, it means that the elves get to keep their long, luscious, beautiful hair, but also it gets to look professional and tactical, because, I mean, their job, again, is to be in the military. They can look as cool as they want, but they have to be tactical enough. Obviously, this isn't going to be their fighting clothes. I'm thinking in their fighting clothes they'd have to have a tighter braid necessary for all hair lengths. And for the uniform, they'd be wearing something a lot easier to move around in. So for like actual attacking and whatever, usually people wear camis, which is short for camouflage. And I didn't want to focus on that today because that's just not what I see problems with. We don't have camis in my unit, so I don't know what really to judge on those. But with things based off of SDBs, things such as NSUs, I noticed problems immediately. Like, there's this one challenge to watch the movie Top Gun and spot what's wrong with it, and it's really easy. You'll just be watching and you'll see some guy wearing his hat inside of an elevator, and it's like, he should take his cover off, he's indoors, Or you'll just be watching and you'll just be like, he should not be wearing his dress whites out on like the battlefield. That would ruin it, And it's just, there's so many problems sometimes, and it's like you gotta really just think about that. Or you gotta really think about, like, obviously not everything is going to be realistic, but destroying somebody, I guess, if they look like shabby, if they look, bad, people will notice with military uniforms if people are in ROTC or if people were in the military. So just remember that. What else was I gonna say? So you can see me right now drawing the braids and whatever, but I'm thinking really hard right now. brain is at full firepower. Yeah. But, oh yes. So, depending on what character you're going to be talking about, they're going to have different ways that they wear the uniform. If you're going to talk about a sloppy character, they're going to wear their uniform sloppy. But if they're going to be a sloppy character, they're not going to be a high rank. And I feel like this is something that's very misunderstood, because sometimes I'll see, again, with the freaking Dead Man Wonderland, I'm sure it's a great show, but I could not get over it. This character walks into frame, she's a high-ranking officer, and you can tell immediately she's supposed to look so hot and so cool and so even sexy, right? But she looks, oh yeah, that's me crashing out, sorry, on the screen. I'm very upset about, I was drawing her. But she has asymmetrical bangs, she's chewing gum, she's, oh god, huge hoop earrings. That would never fly ever, because yes, I'm sure you could potentially design a uniform where everyone wears hoop earrings, and I think I might do that in another video, because you can make really cool looking unique militaries with lots of colors, everything like that. In fact, one really good show that has nice uniforms and all the characters have widely unique hair and such is Suka Suka, or World End. I forget the rest of the name, but it's a beautiful show, and the main characters are kind of in the military, but at the same time, they're more like a volunteer force. So it makes sense that they're allowed to have their hair, be long and not in uniform ranks. Because, first of all, most of the military isn't human, so they don't really have the humanoid standards. And second of all, the girls who are in the military aren't really in the military. They're kind of a volunteer fighter force. They have no choice. And so, how are they supposed to adhere to the standards if, they're not even choosing to really, they can't be kicked out, so they can't really follow the standards, and they still have it neat and put away. It's just not in typical standards. And on top of that, the character who is in the military willingly, and he's a high-ranking officer, he has his hair within regulations, and it looks very nice. And that is just a fantastic example. The uniform also just looks really nice and really neat. And despite not having much identification for each of the characters, some of the characters you can definitely tell that they are higher ranking. And I really like that. I think Suka Suka is an absolutely fabulous show. I really suggest watching it, although I will warn you, you might cry. Great anime. Made me very happy because the uniforms look so nice. But basically, you just want to, make sure that the uniform looks nice. You want to make sure it looks really neat. And you don't want to, give a character who wears their uniform sloppy a high rank, because high-ranking officers are supposed to be the example. If you have, an officer who you don't want your, your watchers, your viewers, your readers to like, either have them be kind of, I want to say, put a stick up their butt, so that they're really angry and loud and whatever, or have them be suck up to one specific other higher ranking person, or have them be like this, because it's very difficult in the military or in ROTC or anything to be to not try. If you don't try, you're not going to succeed. And that really shows with the uniform. If you don't put effort into it, you're not going to get, you're gonna get in trouble. Because, like, boot camp, I haven't been there, but I've heard stories. People come back from boot camp, they're all like, they made us run in the waves in our uniforms if they weren't perfect, and get sand all over them, and it was horrible. And that's kind of just what happens, you know? If your character doesn't try, they're never gonna rank up. And so if you have a low-ranking character who doesn't try, they're going to be a low-ranking character. And that's okay. We do need lower-ranking characters. Not everyone's going to be high rank, obviously. But that's it. So, have a nice day, everyone. Thank you for watching.